I think it is also clear to put into a proper perspective the fact that in the Middle East, the situation is not just good guys and bad guys. If Israel is wrong in its treatment of the Palestinians, we must also look at what the Arab countries in that region are doing as well. Ask ourselves if there are very many vestiges of democracy, of human rights. Ask ourselves why billionaires who run governments, who talk about their concern for the hungry and desperate Palestinians, presumably their brothers and sisters, are not so quick to follow their words with dollars. So I think in terms of the Middle East, the truth of the matter is very, very sadly, for many reasons, you have a difficult situation there. Israel has done many wrong things. Certainly, the Arab countries deserve their share of the blame and the responsibility as well. Okay, I wanted to very briefly touch upon my views of the Persian Gulf, and I guess I don't have the time to do it, other than to say the Persian Gulf problem has got to be, is a complicated issue, to say the least. And I think it has to do with a couple of facts. One, the continuation of our support for sheiks and kings who are out of touch with their people. But second of all, the understanding that Saddam Hussein is not a nice guy. That's the simple truth. My position, in a nutshell, is to support a defensive action, military action, to support economic pressure, diplomatic efforts to stop this guy who, in my view, should not be allowed to control the Middle East. I think the military forces, of which the United States should be a part, should exist under the United Nations. I am deeply concerned about the massive buildup of troops in that region. Absolutely do not want to see the United States invade Iraq and get involved in a Vietnam-type war in the Middle East. I think we can win our goals, get the retreat of Iraq from Kuwait, free the hostages, and stop his aggressive posture through economic means, through diplomatic means, and by a shared military presence under the United Nations. I think it may not happen tomorrow. It may take a while. But I think if we persist, we will win and gain our goals, and there will not be a war in that region. Thank you very much.
If you are interested in education, funding for medical care, conversion to peace, housing for the homeless, and I don't want to run through the litany that Mr. Sanders generally will provide for us, then you have to face the conspiracy that has just occurred, of which both Sanders and Smith are a part, in which they support the restoration of our budget to the control of the military-industrial complex for 5 more years. U.S. troops have already achieved that goal. The peace dividend has been shit-canned. I'm not talking in this context about rising prices and the prospect of recession. I'm talking about those other things that we had hoped for as the heat went out of the Cold War over the past year or so. One of the results of this marvelous conspiracy between the supporters of our military presence in what I call Southwest Asia. I don't use the term that's most commonly used here. Mid as related to what? Mid as related to far and to near. Far and near as related to what? Far and near as related to Great Britain. No thanks. Southwest Asia, please. For over 1,000 years, Mesopotamia and Persia were at each other's throats, except when they were occupied by somebody else. The presence of our military has brought peace and jihad. What a wonderful result to start with. For 45 years, a weak and frail country called Israel, for its security, has had to sell itself in many ways to U.S. international policy. The most latest, how does Israel get involved in the Iran-Contra affair? For currently, I suppose, in the neighborhood of $3.5 billion a year. To save its life. And now the snake, here was Israel, the stalking horse. Here was Israel, the point man, or the main man, and the snake was under the sand. Now the snake is on top of the sand. And what is that worth now? What will Orrin Hatch decide when he says, tighten the belt, all right, because the depression is here, because prices are up, because, and we got to put more money into the military. Is Israel worth so much now? Now that the snake is above the sand? And what a buddy we've made to take Israel's place. What a great buddy we got. Top man on our terrorist list. Assad of Syria is now taking the place of Israel as our best buddy to keep the Arabs at each other's throats. And that all comes about because some people, 2 candidates in Vermont, support the sending of U.S. military into a place where we have been able to keep out and at least keep the snake under the sand. It is my goal in the course of the next few days and weeks to see that all the candidates from the state of Vermont for the U.S. House form a united front to call for the withdrawal of U.S. troops as far as I'm from Southwest Asia. As far as I'm concerned, anyone who changes his mind between now and November 6th, that's retroactive to August 2nd. I will make no commentary from me. I want to encourage people to change their minds. I want the people around the country to see that everyone in Vermont, every candidate in Vermont is standing for that position. And you people can make it happen because some people can be persuaded to move if you tell them to move and if you recognize the seriousness of the situation that we have put ourselves in. Thank you.
We thought what we would do now is give each candidate an opportunity either to clarify something, challenge another candidate on a particular item, or pass on the time. And it probably won't be the last of those. Maybe in the range of about a couple of minute period. So I don't know what order we could do this, and maybe we'll just go through alphabetically this time. And start with Peter Diamondstone, and then Bernie Sanders, and then Dolores, and if my alphabet is right, and then Peter Smith. Just a very, very brief comment, okay? Then we can go over the questions.
I heard mention of the sovereignty of nations and keeping smaller nations from being told what to do by larger nations. And our congressperson says that he's doing a good job, and I want to ask Peter Smith, why, when the sovereignty of Panama was at stake and the larger nation telling another what to do, and the usurpation of the War Power Act, the war power that belongs to Congress, did you not begin impeachment against the President of the United States if you thought that the sovereignty of other nations was so important and that larger nations should not tell others what to do?
In a fact, when the invasion of Panama occurred, I said that I supported it, and I think you know that. But I think there's a larger question here, and it is, frankly, whether one size and one response and one understanding of foreign affairs fits all situations. Quite frankly, Peter, as I understand, and I think if you read my record, especially with regard to Central America, to a deep concern about Nicaragua, which I voted, to an equally deep concern about El Salvador, which I voted. What I have tried to understand and to do is to understand each problem in the context of the politics and the culture and the world, and understand that they aren't all the same. That there is not a one-size-fits-all foreign policy or set of relationships for this or any other country, or for you and I or all these people in this room. Each situation is different, and I would simply say to you that the issue in the Persian Gulf, and I think it's fair to say we probably disagree about it, but I see the situation in the Persian Gulf, and I believe that the reason that the leadership of the world virtually is either aggressively on the sidelines or supporting through the United Nations and through the international action and financially opposed to Saddam Hussein, with the exceptions to date of Libya and the PLO, as far as I know. There is a reason. If the issue were simply oil, they'd do to us what they've done before, and what others would say we've done to others also in the marketplace of capitalism. But that is not the issue, and that is why world opinion at this point is so dominant. Were we there alone, I would have grave concerns about a unilateral presence. But the bottom line is, we're not only not there alone, we are there in the greatest integrated, comprehensive, international, multiply financed organizational force, I believe, in the history, in this century, certainly. So, one size does not fit all. I see the situations as different. When I believe this country is wrong, as with other issues, I've been willing to take on the president and stand against him and vote my conscience. And in this case, I think, so far, we are doing the right thing.
Am I correct in understanding the format would allow me not to ask a question,
Right.
just to make a brief
just
statement?
okay.
I rarely find myself in agreement with Mr. Diamondstone, but I think his point, his argument was not a bad one. In this sense, can the United States play a leadership role in the world in terms of public opinion, in terms of our presence in the United Nations, when we say we don't like the president of Panama, therefore we can unilaterally invade that country? We didn't like the leadership of a tiny little nation called Grenada. We can send them the Marines there. We did not like the leadership of Nicaragua. Therefore, we could strangle those people, sig the Contras on them, torture them for 8 years. Okay. My view is that the United States of America does not have the right to unilaterally overthrow small governments around the world, often in Latin and Central America. The Soviet Union does not have the right, and now acknowledges it did not have the right to invade Afghanistan. And in my view, Iraq does not have the right to invade Kuwait. I think if there is any silver lining out of the crisis in the Persian Gulf, it is now the understanding that complex international issues are going to have to be resolved in the United Nations. And frankly, I congratulate President Bush for going to the United Nations. But I think what he may end up understanding is that the next time he and his friends think about launching an invasion in Latin or Central America, they may think twice after all of the rhetoric that we've heard about how large nations should not be invading small nations. What I want to very briefly touch upon now is my view of the Persian Gulf crisis, very briefly. Point number one, as happened in the early 1970s, the oil companies will use any pretext to raise their rates. They're doing it right now. They're ripping off the people. The government must act swiftly to prevent that. Number two, you'll recall that in the early 1970s, forget the early 1970s. You'll remember that in the early 1970s, actually, right, people talked about the need for a new energy policy, that we cannot be dependent on Middle East oil. Remember that? We're more dependent on Middle East oil today than we were then. Clearly, we need major efforts towards conservation, new energy systems, so that for environmental reasons as well as political reasons, we do not remain dependent on Middle East oil or fossil fuel in general. Third point I touched upon earlier. We have got to move within the United Nations to stop the horrendous spending of billions of dollars funding armaments for third world dictatorships. Fourthly, and where I think maybe Mr. Smith, others will talk about this issue tonight, where we may have a difference. I believe what Bush did initially in sending military personnel to the Middle East as a defensive measure was correct. My concern now is that 140,000 soldiers later, I am getting a little bit nervous. Okay.
Good.
Clearly, our role there under the United Nations with multinational forces have got to be defensive. I think that's proper, along with economic pressure and diplomatic efforts. What I fear is that some people around the White House are concerned. You don't mind, do you, Peter?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, there's a guy waving a card at you over here for half an hour.
Okay. What my fear is that there are those who would like to use the current pretext to go to war, an aggressive war against Iraq. I think that would be a disaster.
One of the reasons that I would like to see a peaceful solution in the Middle East and a two-state solution, I think we need to have Israel standing on its own feet. I think there needs to be a Palestinian state standing on its own feet. And I think that we need to help the other countries in that area to get on with their economic development. I'd like to ask you, Bernie Sanders, a question, because you mentioned there are 30,000 to 40,000 children that die each day around the world. $5 a year would keep them living. One half, a good half, of our total foreign budget, foreign aid allocations go to two countries, Israel and Egypt, to keep a balance there, to keep a fighting kind of balance there. If you were in Congress, would you continue to have this number of children dying? For example, in Africa, each average citizen would get $1 a year from us as it stands now. That's not talking about other parts of the world. What would you do to bring about a better use, I think a better use, of our foreign aid monies?
It's a very fair and an excellent question. Clearly, I think we are now giving Israel $4 billion a year. We are giving Egypt significant sums of money. We are selling armaments to third world countries around the entire planet, dictatorships. Clearly, it is absolutely imperative that we reduce the amount of military aid we're giving not only to Israel, but to Egypt, but to all of the Arab countries, and more importantly, not just the United States. It is absolutely incredulous that when 30,000 children starve to death a day, the Soviet Union continues to heavily fund Syria, that France plays a major role selling weaponry all over the third world. As I indicated earlier, what I believe has to happen, and I would love to see the United States initiate that effort, is to bring the world powers together within the United Nations and say, stop the funding, the military funding of the third world countries. Let us use that money in order to improve the economies of the third world, develop new economic relations between the first and the third world. We want money to prevent the starvation, to build the schools, to build the health programs, not to give them AWACS and sophisticated weaponry to kill each other. So that's what I think.
Well, I think it's time to get to some questions. I got lots of good things to say about.
Well, if there are any questions, there might be a couple from the floor. If you're associated with the press or media of some sort, would you please identify yourself for the question? Are there any questions? I'm sorry, oh, yes, I can't see, yes.
Yes, I'm Stephen Shaw from the University of Vermont Jewish Action Coalition. And I'd like to ask each of the candidates, I know this isn't an issue that's discussed anymore in the press now that Iraq is invaded Kuwait, but to each of you, what is your position on the question of a Palestinian state in the West Bank? And furthermore, how have the recent events in the Middle East, namely the invasion of Kuwait, perhaps altered your opinion on this question?
We have a minute each.
Yeah, it's altered my opinion, and that is, it's better happen a lot faster than we had. You know, we always thought there was going to be some time to negotiate, but now that Israel is not quite so valuable anymore as a partner in our policy in Southwest Asia, at this point in time, I think that Israel has got to move very quickly for peaceful land, although that's been my position all along. And I think that negotiation has to go on, must go on with the PLO, and that has got to happen in a hurry, because I don't think there's going to continue to be the same kind of flow of money there that we've had up until this war. And one tag on that, I think it's perfectly legitimate for that piece of land which was ripped away from Iraq somewhere between 1899 and 1921 by process, finally in 1921, and turned into an independent country. I think it's perfectly appropriate, not for the use of arms, but for that property to be returned to Iraq. Now, that means maybe some bargaining has to be done to let that happen by plebiscite or let some other process go on, but that land is Iraqi land, and it always was. So let us not misunderstand it. This is like Ireland trying to get back Northern Ireland from Britain. This is like was it Colombia or Venezuela that we ripped Panama off to create a nation of it. That nation had tried to get back the land that we ripped off in the first place to create the Panama Canal. This is not, and that's the only deep water port in the Gulf, and that's why Britain did it. All right, so we are not talking about no just claim here.
Very briefly, number one, it is not a debatable issue to me that Israel has the absolute right to its territorial integrity. It is a nation. It must be allowed to exist, and that, I trust, is not a debatable issue. I believe that in the long run, a two-state solution, in fact, might well be the most reasonable out to the very volatile situation regarding the Palestinians. I think you asked a good question, is how does that debate stand now after the Iraqi invasion and after Yasser Arafat's support of that invasion? I think that clearly the credibility of the PLO and Yasser Arafat has taken a marked turn downward as a result of the support of the invasion. And I think that probably in Israel it becomes harder for those people who are members of such organizations as Peace Now or the Mapam Party, the left wing in Israel as opposed to Likud, who in fact have wanted to negotiate, have wanted to reach out, have wanted to come up with some solution. Their position now becomes much more tenuous because of Arafat's and the PLO's support of that invasion. It makes it that much more difficult. Peter just mentioned, I think, a truthful point, that ultimately the solution to the problems there are going to have to be resolved by the people in that area. I think that's true. But it goes without saying that a nation like the United States, which puts billions and billions of dollars into that region, obviously has enormous influence. My hope is that the United States government, as it cuts down military support all over that region, for Israel and the Arab countries, as it tries to bring serious debate within the United Nations, will look toward some of the people in Israel who are not ultra-nationalists, but the people in Israel, of which there are many, who are trying to bridge the gap between Arab and Jew. And I think that if the President and the Congress can move in that direction, a solution might come about that much faster.
This question is to all the candidates. Because of the Middle East crisis, I see there are a lot of Asians and other non-whites caught in the middle. And they all have become refugees, 100,000 and more than that. And I don't see any mention of this in this country. What you people have, what kind of opinion you have, what you want to do about it.
I'll take a swing at it. Are you, sir, talking about refugees in Kuwait, refugees in Jordan, all
I think in
over?
between, somewhere in the desert,
Well,
and everybody is dying like animals there.
It's interesting that we call Saddam so brutal, but the killing of 2,500 Panamanians is not so brutal. It's interesting, I mean, all the invasions and activity, that the 30,000 dead Nicaraguans is not so brutal. And so on. And we paint this guy, as we always paint our opponents, as ogres, but how are women treated there as compared to other Arab countries? How come they got socialized medicine in Iraq? I mean, that's better than we got. For a brute, that's not bad. And I think that the effort should now be, with regard to those folks that you mentioned, who I presume you mean those who were in the channel crossing Jordan, that the effort should simply be to put the guns down that the United States is carrying and take care of those people. I mean, we've got plenty of food there. We've got plenty of water there. There's no reason for anybody to be hungry or without. Put our guns down and take care of that and get the guns and the soldiers out and the refugees back to their home countries.
You correctly talk about the tragedy of the refugees from Kuwait and seeing them suffering in the desert. Probably, if I may just extrapolate from that, what is going on in this world today, and I would say that the American media deserves extreme condemnation for this, is that not only is there suffering there, which today is not being discussed, but the suffering and the death in the third world today is unhistorical. It has the degree of death and of starvation and of economic misery because of the third world debt, because of the general economic conditions. The fact that third world countries aren't able to sell their products for a decent price. What you're seeing in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, are an entire people who are being brought to their knees. There are countries now where children, even in Mexico, are growing up with mental retardation, generations, because they don't have enough food to sustain normal physical or mental growth. So you ask, I remember teaching in Hamilton College in the spring and having kids do research papers as to how much Time and Newsweek put in to the coverage of third world starvation as opposed to the life and times of Donald Trump. And you know what the answer was? This was before his divorce, when he really got the news. Far more attention was paid to Donald Trump than to the Holocaust, and I use that word advisedly in a temple, in the third world right now.
I'm R.D. Eno. I represent Pari, the Jewish News Magazine. I'd like to ask a three-part question of all the candidates. In Congress, would you support continuation of foreign aid to Israel? B, would you support forgiving loans to Egypt and some $10 billion in loans to Israel? And C, would you continue, in the absence of any international agreement, to stanch the arms flow to the Middle East? Would you support continued arms sales to Israel? Would you support the continuation at present levels or higher of foreign aid to Israel? Would you support forgiveness of the Egyptian loans and the Israeli loans? And would you support continued arms sales to Israel in the absence of any international agreement to stop the arms flow into the Middle East generally?
In another temple, 18 years ago up on Prospect Street. Bernie gave that answer. No more guns for Israel. No more guns for anybody. And we have been calling for that for a long time. No more guns. And the Liberty Union platform that you have in front of you is a nonviolent one and says, no more war. And we say that the way that war and preparations for war are part of that war, and of all war. And we say that that's got to stop. And we, as now the principal arms merchants of the world, we have now taken the substantial lead over everybody else. The responsibility rests with us. As for the loans, I have some problem with lumping them both together. The loans to, at least that ought to be on parity. That is, if I remember rightly, one is very large and or 3 times the size of the other. At least we ought to be willing to talk about that if we're going to forgive one for one. My objection for giving the Egyptian loan at this particular point is that it looks like it's simply part of buying their support in the war against Kuwait or against Egypt, against Iraq in its effort to regain that portion of its country that was ripped off by Britain, known as Kuwait. As for the foreign aid, I have no objection to continuing ordinary foreign aid and would like to see that continue, but I advise that those days are drawing to a close as Assad and Syria assume the role for the United States in causing the trouble that Israel was once bought to do and can no longer do because, we know that they have been begged into silence. Don't get into this one, right? I think that kind of silence is forever, and I think that the snake on the surface now means that it's going to be hard to keep that aid flowing. Very, very difficult. As people say, we have to pull our belts in.
As I indicated earlier, the fact that the United States, the Soviet Union, France, and other countries are pouring and have poured billions and billions of dollars into the Middle East, arming countries against each other, to me is total insanity. And I think it is absolutely appropriate for the superpowers of the world under the aegis of the United Nations to begin to sit down and talk about major, radical cutbacks in military aid to the entire region, simultaneously to all countries. And I think given the ending of the Cold War and the fact that the Soviet Union is working with us in this crisis allows us the opportunity to do that. Very important issue. In terms of the forgiveness of the loans, I think we have 2 problems. Number one, as you know, there is a $3 trillion debt, $3 trillion national debt right now in the United States. And I think that rather than simply forgiving third world loans, what really has to happen is there has to be a new relationship between the first and third world, first and second world. What goes on right now is that we have serious economic problems in our own country. Our own people are not producing the products, creating the jobs. We're not creating the jobs because, among other things, many third world nations simply have no money in which to buy products and to trade with us. So I would tie the whole issue of third world debt into a new economic relationship between the first world and the second and third worlds. Thirdly, I am a supporter of foreign aid when it serves economic and human purposes, and certainly would support those goals.
Nick Hanks with WAMC Radio. The peace dividend is evidently off the books now. Peter Diamondstone spoke eloquently on that particular item very succinctly. How will you vote in the question of defense and military spending cutbacks in the next 2 years? if you're elected on each of you?
Come this way.
No, I don't agree that the peace dividend is gone. I mean, there are some people, clearly, militarist-type people, who will tell you, given the crisis in the Middle East, we've got to increase military spending. We still need Star Wars. We still need $700 million stealth bombers. We still need all kinds of submarines, which no one thinks are necessary. No. The extraordinary event of the last several years, Persian Gulf or not Persian Gulf, is the Cold War is over. Stop for a moment. Gorbachev last week met with Bush. They are on the same side. Virtually all of our military spending since World War II has been based on the possibility of a world war with the Soviet Union. It's over. East Germany is now part of West Germany. Lech Walesa and friends are running Poland. Havel is running Czechoslovakia. My own view is that we can cut military spending by 50% in the next 5 years without lowering in any significant way our ability to defend ourselves. If we develop a progressive tax system in this country, we could raise significantly more money. So I refuse to accept that there is not a peace dividend with the end of the Cold War. There is a very substantial peace dividend, and we should not let the right wing in Congress tell us otherwise.
Sanders said something about Gorbachev and Bush being on the same side and all the ones in between. And that really has brought me, I mean, not just from his remarks, but seeing it happening, makes it really clear to me that there isn't a first, second, third, fourth, that there's two worlds. There's first and it's white, and there's a second and it's not. And in my view, that's what's going on, and that's what Kuwait is all about, and that's what the hate for Saddam Hussein is all about. And my friend Smith says we can't go with an axe at the budget of the military, and it's painted on my car. Zero war budget. It's been there a long time. Zero war budget. Taxes for child care, taxes for adult care, nothing for warfare. And we have to do that. It's not a matter... Bill Meyer formed this party in 1958, the Liberty Union, and I don't know if you remember him, but he got elected saying unilateral cessation of nuclear testing, and the year was 1958, at the height of the McCarthy period. Right? And now we have this other pressure, and maybe Mr. Smith and others will go and stand for cutting the budget. But the voices of the military, but the voices for war are louder than ever. And that's because it's convenient, you see, because they're not the same color as we are. And they speak different languages than we do. And I think that's really what war now is all about, now that the white world has got its act together.
My question is, I've heard each of you to varying degrees speak of a two-state solution to the Palestinian question, however, and a negotiated one. However, the question is, how do you get the parties to the table, and do you favor using U.S. aid to Israel as a means of leverage to get Israel to the negotiating table?
I trust that everybody up here with me will concede that the issues in the Middle East are enormously complicated, and nobody but a fool thinks that there is a simple solution or that there is one evil protagonist in the region. As I've indicated earlier, I have, as somebody who is Jewish, by the way, I have deep concerns about Israeli policy toward the Palestinians. It is not pleasant to see on television Israeli policemen beating up children. I have deep concerns about Israeli involvement in running guns to some of the worst governments throughout the world. That's not what Israel should be doing. But on the other hand, I am not naive enough to believe that all the other countries surrounding Israel are wonderful, democratic countries who want nothing more than peace and brotherhood. They're very nasty people in that region, countries that have invaded Israel. leadership in the Arab world that has sworn to destroy Israel. The gentleman over in the corner asked earlier in terms of the relationship between the PLO and Israel. What's the impact of events in the last month? And it's a serious impact. How easy is it for the people in Israel, the pro-peace people now, to say, yeah, let's sit down with the PLO after they have supported Saddam Hussein's invasion of Iraq, of Kuwait? Makes that much more difficult. To answer your question, Josh, I think that given the fact that the United States and the Soviet Union and France are putting so much money into weapons in that region, they do have leverage. They really do. And the insanity of putting more and more weaponry into the hands of people who could explode against each other and start a world war, if not a nuclear war, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So I think the United States can play a leadership role within the United Nations of saying to the arms merchants of the world, let us stop arming the protagonists. Let's bring them together. Much better to give them money for economic development and for food and for education than weapons. So I think the United States can play a role. I would like the United States to be playing a role within the United Nations to, in fact, not unilaterally, but multilaterally, lower the amount of arms that are coming into that region. Thank you.
Would you use foreign aid as a mean, the threat of reducing foreign aid as a means of getting Israel's?
I would use the threat of reductions in military aid to all parties. Military aid to all parties, absolutely.
But not to Israel specifically.
Not to Israel alone.
You see, the point that I've been trying to make all evening, I have serious problems with Israeli behavior. I have equally serious problems with the behavior and attitudes of many of the Arab countries. I think you've got to go forward in both areas and not just picking out one country.
I think I said that earlier, that I'm not willing to use foreign aid as a club. But the club is going to happen because that which Israel has to offer to U.S. international policy has much less value now. And when Mr. Smith says that the people in Congress and the people of our nation are afraid, they are afraid because Mr. Smith and Mr. Sanders support the military occupation of Saudi Arabia and perpetuate that fear by saying that's a necessary thing. There's a domino theory about to happen that they're going to go from Kuwait, and nobody talks about the legitimate interests of Iraq in Kuwait as opposed to any interest it might have, which would be illegitimate in the lands of Saudi Arabia. And there is one evil in the region. I beg to differ with you. There is one evil, and when it used to be the snake was Britain, now it's us. And that is, for me, fundamental, that it is we who foment that anger. It is we who feed it all to avoid pan-Arabic affiliation. It is we and France and England and so on, but it is our policy fundamentally. It is our policy to keep those peoples from uniting and working cooperatively together. I mean, isn't that why we're so upset about Kuwait? Because Kuwait was feeding us cheap oil, violating the OPEC agreements, overproducing with respect to its quota. Isn't that why we're so upset when it comes to the issue of oil? Right? Because we want to keep them divided and broken up. Right? Not only from the point of view of oil, but from the point of view of their economic development, from the point of view, because then they might even want more money, more of a share. They might even develop their own refineries, and we might have to buy it that way. Shell oil won't get the raw material and then make the profit for turning it into something we can use. I disagree with the fact that there is no one evil in the region. It is us who has been using Israel in this way for 45 years, and only because it is so frail, and we are the one who keep. I mean, Fouad and Saud and Assad, we love it, right? And that keeps Israel on the edge of its seat too, so that it has to come and fawn to us and do the duty that we instruct it to do. I think that what we need to do is simply say that in the event that there's going to be a peace settlement, that we'll put the troops, we'll protect the Israeli security with the troops that we have now in Saudi Arabia, that we'll agree in the United Nations to keep troops there to protect Israeli borders when that agreement is reached.
Sunday evening, and we've been going for quite a while, and I know people are going long ways to travel, and so I think maybe I'll try to give each person a chance to, with 1 minute final remark, keeping in mind that brevity is the soul. Why don't we do it in reverse order, so whoever was one is before is once, or whatever.
It's Old Testament, isn't it?
Hebrew. I believe that the reason why there's war is because the wealthy never pay for it. All right? And what happens is we pay for it, and so they don't care whether there's war, and they can use it as their own tool. And the reason that they never pay for it is because there are some people who have so much power over their income that no matter what we do with taxes, we can't affect it. For instance, DeBakey is a heart surgeon. We double his taxes, he'll double his fees for heart surgery. You raise the taxes on Canseco, the ball player, and he'll get $10 million instead of 5. You double the taxes on Lee Iacocca, instead of $27 million, he'll get $54 million. They never pay. That's why they don't care, and that's why they can use this tool we call war. And the way to stop that is to say, at some level of income, we will have a 100% tax on everything over that. And that figure will go up and down depending on the war budget. Like, you might get to keep everything under $100,000 or have it taxed if we have a $300 billion war budget, but if we have a zero war budget, you might get to have that 100% tax come into effect at $150,000. And you watch how fast there's an end to war.
Peter Smith and I agree there will be an election on November 6th. We do disagree as to who you should vote for. In truth, though, probably the most important reality of November 6th nationally, not in Vermont where we win, but nationally, is that the estimate is that 65% of the American people are not going to vote. As you know, when Bush defeated Dukakis, 50% of the American people voted. We now have the lowest voter turnout of any industrialized democracy in the world by far. The most important reality of this campaign, and I say this over and over again with the deepest sincerity, the American people, especially working people and poor people, are giving up on the American political system. The problems facing our nation are enormous, and yet the people no longer have faith that the Congress, 99% of whom get reelected, are capable of dealing with the reality of people's lives. Economically, you all know, the richest people are becoming much richer. Poorest people are becoming poorer, sleeping out on the streets. The middle class is shrinking. You know that we are one of 2 nations in the entire industrialized world that does not have national health care, which says finally that if you're an American citizen, you're entitled to all of the health care that you need, and you don't have to pauperize yourself if you're an elderly person to get into a nursing home. In terms of the discussion that we've had tonight, especially now that the Cold War is in fact over, my dream is that this nation becomes the leader in the world, not in selling weapons, but in making peace. We are a great nation, and we should be using our strength now to work with the third world so that the children do not starve to death, to stimulate new economic development relationships, to cut military spending significantly. We have an opportunity right now that a decade ago people would not have dreamed of. Frankly, we need a totally new direction in Congress, a totally new set of priorities. We need to bring people into the process. We cannot allow corporate PACs to continue to buy politicians from one end of this country to the other. We need a political revolution in this country. That's what this campaign is about. And I very much appreciate your support on November 6th. Thank you.